Hi there, my name is Zach Ford, and today I'm going to be analyzing the textbook American History, the Modern Era since 1865. My name is Zach Ford, and I'm a pre-service history teacher at WKU. First, we take a look at the author, who is Donald A. Ritchie. The text was published in 2001 by Glencoe and McGraw-Hill. Uh, this text individually was developed for the high school setting and for the American history studies. And the actual analysis that I will be covering will go through Section 1 of World Affairs, 1933 through 1939, Section 2, Moving Closer to War, Section 3, the United States at War, and Section 4, War on the Home Front. Uh, First thing we look at is we're going to look at the standards and how well they meet the criteria of the textbook of the Kentucky Core Standards. I will use the Likert scale to express my agreement, and on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree, and then we will assess that using the elements of thought. First standard that we look at is SSHS 2.14, where it states students understand the democratic principles of justice, equality, responsibility, and freedom and apply them to real-life situations. As you can see here, I agree that this text has met that criteria, and there are several examples there, but I do feel like they could have done a little bit of extra work. The references, I actually went through this chapter and tallied each time that the book and text mentioned justice, equality, responsibility, and freedom. And as you can see here, the results, the equality and responsibility were tied for first. And then second was freedom, which was a very strong overlying theme for the World War II that we examined. Examples that it actually gives and that I pulled from those tallies was example of freedom was in one of the texts that where it says FDR says, "I shall respect the sovereign rights of all nations in the Western Hemisphere." Right there we see that he understands the right of freedom and that he will allow it to rule and reign. He's not going to overstep his boundaries and the sovereign rights of any other nation. Responsibility is stated whenever Britain and France pledged to defend Poland from Hitler, and they asked the Soviet Union to join in an alliance to contain Germany. Right there we see that the responsibility fell upon Britain and France to defend Poland. They were a smaller country, and the students are able to realize through this text that they had no other allies, and with the geography of them and location, they were the ones who had to stand by them, and it fell to them and their responsibility. Talk of equality, we see that on whenever we get to section 4 on a War of the Home Front, it starts to go into the women and how they incorporated their work into the industry and their pay, how they became more equals, and whenever all this was going on, whenever they encouraged women to get into the industry so that we could better produce, they became a slogan that said, "If you can drive a car, you can run a machine," and that slogan became very widespread. Whenever it talks of justice, and found in the text, U.S., Britain, Soviet Union, and France should occupy Germany after the war, but they promised to encourage some form of representative government for the other peoples of Europe. Right there we see that the Allied forces and Britain, Soviet Union, after the Yalta Conference, decided that their judgment involved in the determination of rights and assignment of rewards and punishments was that they stay in Germany and occupy it, but at the same time they give them a sense of justice because they are going to find a better alternative. Next standard that we see is students can accurately describe various forms of government and analyze issues that relate to their rights and responsibilities of citizens in a democracy. As you see here, I was unsure as to whether or not I agreed upon this standard and whether or not they met it, as we will see here. Uh, in the text, it mentions of one type of one or two different types of different kind of government. And here we see that Hitler and Mussolini followed this new doctrine known as fascism, a form of government in which a dictator and supporters cooperate to seek more power for their nation, usually at the expense of rights for individuals. Also, each ruler established a totalitarian state, a nation that totally controls the life of its people. And here we see that the book does a great job of showing a different type of government and the reasonings for it, but what they don't go into detail is why this government came about, why Hitler and Mussolini felt the need to bring about this government out of all the other ones in opposition to democracy and every other parliamentary system. The next standard that we see is students understand, analyze, and interpret historical events, conditions, trends, and issues to develop historical perspective. I strongly agree that the text did a wonderful job of doing this, which is hard not to do in a historical context. Uh, Three of the expectations listed by the Kentucky Core of Content in this specific standard stated, history is a series of connected events shaped by multiple cause and effect relationships tying past to present. This is what they want their students to learn in the Kentucky Core content. And right there in the text we see that both Hitler and Mussolini hinted that another war might be necessary to right the wrongs they felt had been done to their countries by the Treaty of Versailles. And so there we see the tie between past and present and the cause and effect of why they brought about this war. Another thing that they want their students to understand in the Kentucky Core is geography and natural resources, how they have a significant impact on historical perspectives and events. And we see in the text that whenever the USSR was uninvolved in the war, was trying to avoid it, and then Hitler decided that he wanted their oil supplies and their vast wheat, and so he just forced his way into Russia and draw them out. Next, we see that the advances in research, science, and technology have a significant impact on historical events, American society, and the global community. There's probably not a greater scientific breakthrough that impacted history in the way that it did than the atomic bomb, and this is covered in this section whenever we secretly developed at the beginning of the war, and we tested it in 1945 and then successfully brought an end to the war. Next, we look at some of the assumptions after looking at this data, and we see that the author has a neutral tone in the delivery of information for it controls how we interpret it. The author should have neutral tone whenever he's giving this, because if not, he's going to completely alter the way that these kids see the events in history. Kentucky Core standards have changed also since 2001, and were probably not even considered when creating this individual text because they don't have to apply by the Kentucky standards, but yet a national standard. And also, we can assume that this text was created for high school students. Some of the conclusions that we see after this data is that equality and change is brought forth out of force. In just about every instance, even whenever there's gender equality and the soldiers, they had to be forced. Women weren't seen as equals or as they should have been in the workforce at all, but the demand for it on the home front is it was unavoidable without a doubt, and there had to be something done, so these women stepped up to the plate, but it was out of force that American citizens had to accept this. And the same with the African Americans in the Army. We started to run low on troops, and we needed more men, the most that we could, and we were forced to implement these African Americans into the fight. Another conclusion that we can see is that there's no reasoning for other governments or existence in order to relate to issues. One of the standards talks about 2.15, I believe, is where it talks about relating issues to our citizens in a democracy today. And whenever the text gives an example of other governments, it has no other issues to relate to. Another conclusion we see is whenever given from the U.S. perspective, uh, all this entire text is in an American history perspective, and so it goes without saying that it has a very biased and viewpoint in some areas. Uh, Students are given much of the information of cause and effect issues and will help them to further understand the complexities of history. The overall purpose of this text and chapter was for the information given in this particular chapter is to convey the reasons for mass damage, death throughout the world during this time, how boundary lines and alliances were formed and continue to exist, how World War II was fought and won. Next, we look at the diversity in this text, and we look at the images. And whenever I looked at the total images, there was only 77 recognizable faces that I could count and go off of. From those 77, 10 of them that I observed were of women. While that is a fairly low statistic, what's important within this chapter and text is the images that they do convey and show. Two of those images are right here for you, and it's for the Rosie the Riveter, and whenever they were incorporating women into these industrial roles. And you can see there that they portray women as a very important part. Purpose of these images is to show women of today's age how they were an essential part of the success in the overall war, and so women in schools can learn how they made the first steps to become equal in today's law. Whenever we look at diversity in age, we see that of those 77 that we could count, there was a large number that was between the ages of 20 and 30, which makes sense when looking at the context because it is a war. And a lot of younger men were going off to war. And then the next big number we see is 50 and over. And that is mainly due because of the pictures in the text referring to leaders and decision makers within their countries who are usually happen to be older men. Implications of this data is students may not understand the contributions the middle-aged community made on the home front. Students could view the contributions of older people in society as more important, that from the years 20 to 30 are the most sought-after job occupants. Whenever looking at diversity and race, we see that there's a very big gap. Whenever looking at the pictures in this text, there was only 15 Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders, and that was just because they were Japanese, and they had to be shown in the context of this history. Other than that, it was specifically white, and is very, very racial bias. Assumptions and implications is that the photographs and data are skewed from this time period due to the era of history. And the implication of that is the students of different race that read and studied this text feel that their culture and ancestry was unimportant and irrelevant. Thank you for your time.